I really want to acknowledge the contributors that are here in front of you. Brandy Ballard, author, artist, poet, MFA candidate at the University of South Carolina, and the James Dickey Fellow. I can't go on with enough accolades because I was fortunate enough last summer to identify Brandy as someone who I thought had the talent to help me compile and edit this anthology which you have in front of you. And lo and behold, I chose wisely. I'm grateful. Edward Madden, Associate Professor in the English Department, University of South Carolina, author of several books of poetry, distinguished himself nationwide, and I'm really grateful for his contribution. Kathy Cuppet, here at the end, is a Spanish professor nearby in Hartsville, Coker College, and an accomplished poet who made a wonderful contribution to the book. Cassie Primo Steele, PhD, author of at least 8 or 9 books of poetry. Really grateful for your contribution. And Amelia Cornell, student, aspiring social worker, someone who had a very important story to share with us. Thank you very much for showing up this afternoon. I'm deeply grateful. I learned about 3 years ago how to bleed a story, literally how to bleed a story, after I had a triple bypass and lost all my blood after the surgery of ruptured artery. And I remained in a coma for 10 days. And when I did surface, I didn't have Virgil as a guide when I was in my journey, but I had a story to tell. And lo and behold, I found that there were many other people that wanted to share their stories. So I established a blog called All Heart Matters. And initially, of course, it was my journey and story, but it became other stories. And teaching here at the English Department at the University of South Carolina, Sumter, Dr. Hayes Hampton gave me a green light to establish a course in literature and medicine, which was really a convergence of my own illness narrative, along with, of course, assigned readings and poetry and literature, including Chekhov. Students seemed to respond to that, and I decided we'd put together a symposium on narrative medicine, or if you wish, why story matters in illness. And simultaneously, I put out a call for contributions in the form of poetry and stories, essays, all dealing with illness. And we received over 135 submissions. It's really a deluge of these rich stories. I decided that they needed to have, we needed to put a spotlight on those stories. And so we have now, through Copernicus Healthcare, the anthology called The Art of Medicine and Metaphors. I had some prepared remarks to talk about this idea of why metaphors matter in illness narratives. I discovered that so many of us who have experienced or witnessed illness are always struggling for words to explain what has happened. And in my own efforts to understand my heart event, which was traumatizing, I found in my writing a way out of that event. I found purpose, and I was able to recover quickly, I might add. Those that have no pain can imagine those who suffer, and those at the center can imagine what it is to be outside. The strong can imagine the weak. Illuminated lives can't imagine the dark. For sure, what I've learned from many contributions in this book is there are many voices in this anthology, And they're writing about illness, and I think this is at the very heart of healthcare. I would like to read really quickly a passage that I wrote. It says, "The arts and humanities, especially literature, are widely recognized as a centerpiece in medical education. In so many ways, this anthology underscores the opportunities for learning and provides a place for self-expression and healing. This body of selected work reinforces what Emerson revealed when he wrote that the poet is the only and true doctor. The poems and stories presented in this anthology exhibit exemplary form and content. They are all written from the heart. They are about losses and they are also about gains. What patients and doctors continue to understand is the power of telling and listening to personal stories. After all, Dr. Sharon, Rita Sharon, I have a quote from her on the board here, zealously reminds her students and physicians that the mission of narrative medicine is to prepare doctors with the tools to elicit, to attend, to witness, and to interpret the stories of their patients." I am really interested in engaging you this afternoon in more of a conversation after we have these wonderful readings from the contributors to this anthology. And I think that the best place is, to create more of a kind of an open conversation between whatever questions you have for us. And maybe, we're not going to do this alphabetically. Maybe Kathy will start with you and let you read, and if you want to introduce your poem.
Great.
So thank you.
Well, this poem is called The Surgeon's Art, and a few years ago I went to see my doctor for what I thought was a very bad case of indigestion. It turned out to be gallstones, so I went in on a Monday, and Tuesday she said, "Now you need to go over, check yourself into the hospital, and have surgery and have your gallbladder removed." Okay. But afterward, I was amazed because the surgery was performed laparoscopically. So I have a scar that's like 1 inch long now, and it just kind of blew my mind that they could go in and take my gallbladder out and just leave me with this little tiny. So that's where the poem comes from. The Surgeon's Art, for Dr. B and the surgical team. The signature, a tiny line. The human canvas bears the sign of work invisible but fine. The strokes are bold, precise, and clean. Yet must this masterpiece unseen lie veiled beneath the flesh pristine. This art, no florid frescoed wall. The surgeon serves a harder call and strives to leave no trace at all.
So when I got the call, it was hard. I think it was 500 words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was 500 words, and I started writing this nonfiction piece about my uncle, and it was really hard to whittle down like what I thought into 500 words, like his life into 500 words. But I found kind of a parallel of what was happening to his body and what was happening in the writing that really struck me. It's called Dust and Ash. It's been 3 years since my Uncle Ralph died. Up until the year before his death, I always thought his name was Ralph. At least that's what it sounded like in the southern accent of my extended family. The last time I was in Oklahoma was that same year. My mother, sister, and I drove down from Colorado for a visit. Mom went to the hospital the day after we arrived. 2 days later, she asked me if I wanted to go see him. It was summertime, and the dense air smelled of soil and vegetation baked to dust and ash. I was comfortable inside of my grandparents' new trailer, where the air conditioning was so high that I needed an Afghan to keep my legs warm. I wasn't sure. She told me that she didn't see much point in me going. He didn't even seem to recognize her. Part of me felt guilty for not going, but I didn't really want to. Besides, the only memories I had of him were the times he would come into the old trailer after working in my grandparents' refrigerator repair shop all day. He'd walk in wearing cowboy boots, jeans, a button-up shirt, and gold-rimmed aviator sunglasses. His skin, creased and folded by the sun, was always dark. If I was near the door, he'd ask, "What are you doing?" in his harsh, rasping voice. Other than that, I couldn't understand anything he said. My uncle's death was the result of an ingrown toenail. A doctor pulled the nail and the site became gangrenous. The doctors took his toe first, the foot went next, then the leg, then part of his thigh. His leg would continue to be whittled down. A cancerous lump in his neck caused a blood clot that made its way to his brain. The result was his first stroke, which left him paralyzed on his right side. He drifted in and out, not always able to remember others, let alone himself. The following February, his other leg had to be amputated. He had a stroke during the surgery and could no longer move or talk. When he finally passed, after 20 surgeries in 2 years, he weighed 70 pounds. I felt such a sense of guilt and shame when he died. Even if I didn't know him, how could I have refused to see him? Part of me naively assumed that he would be all right. I tell myself now that I didn't see him because I didn't want to remember him that way. I wanted to remember the tattered cowboy who always had a bottle of beer in one hand and a filterless cigarette in the other. It's not romantic by any means, especially because of the complications caused by his alcoholism and smoking. But it beat remembering a gaunt man wasting away in a hospital bed with no recollection of the person he once was. Sometimes I wonder if that's the entire truth or just a lie I tell myself to justify not going to see him. There's not an answer to that question, at least not one I can trust myself to give. I never made it out to the funeral. A Colorado snowstorm made it too dangerous to travel. His ashes were released at Mount Scott, part of the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. It was at the base of the mountain, near a river. The family argues about the location now. What they do agree on was the way his ashes swirled and spiraled down to the ground before dissipating.
Why don't you read both of your sections?
Thank you. The first thing I'll read is an essay called "Wisteria is Sweet and Blooms Short." At first it was an escape. I imagine it is this way for some of the girls who come here, to this detention center located along a lake in a pine forest on land that was an old 4-H camp. There aren't as many kids in 4-H in South Carolina anymore, just as there aren't as many farms as there used to be. Liquor shops dot the rural roads more frequently than fields of crops in some parts of the state. I came here as part of a grant through the South Carolina Arts Commission and Clemson University to allow expressive arts programs to be taught to these girls who are nonviolent juvenile offenders, plucked out of jail for their good behavior and potential, and sent here where they have a better chance with nature and outdoor activities and the arts to change their lives. They are called At Risk, but as the director of the program expressed it to me before I came, they've been risked. Risk has already happened. I nodded. I could imagine it. Risk of rape, risk of abuse, risk of poverty, risk of drugs, risk of drinking, risk of violence, risk of abandonment, risk of a life lived in constant anxiety, uncertainty, chaos, and fear. And after all that, if they act out by stealing someone's purse or vandalizing property, are we to call it crime or using one's voice to get the attention they so desperately need? I came here to give them other ways to use their voices. On the first day of class, I handed them journals and told them there would be no homework, no red pens correcting grammar, no criticism of their writing here. Their only job was to participate and to write whatever they wanted in those journals. I would not even make them read out loud. The important thing is to fill them up, I said. Get it out. Let it all pour out of you and onto the page where it can be transformed and made into something new, something beautiful. And so can you, I told them. You can be transformed into something new. You are already beautiful, but what you have been through needs to come out of you before you can make a change. This is the magic that writing can do. The first class went well. They were quiet, a bit stunned, I think, at how little I talked, how I kept to my promise of giving them a safe space in which to write, appreciative that I asked no one to read. One girl came up after and said, "That was fun. I wasn't really looking forward to it, but I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I came." Another girl overheard this and said, "It wasn't like you had a choice," and everyone laughed. They were on their way, lined up, headed out the door, and the field instructor was now in charge, so I let them go. But what I wanted to say was, oh yes, you do. You do have a choice. That's the whole point. Wherever you are, whether you are in jail or walking through the woods, or writing, or in school, or back home in your own bed, you have a choice in your head to choose where you will be emotionally in your mind, and to choose how you will respond to what is happening around you. You can check out, be numb, be gone, or embrace where you are. See the grace in it. Be grateful for the lessons it can teach, even when it's hard, even when you didn't choose it. I was staying at a cabin they had provided for me, and so I started the next day with a dawn run around the lake and then a walk through the woods, finding a path and a creek and a bridge we would cross later during class. As I finished the walk and came up the stairs near a waterfall, I saw a pine cone hanging from a branch and the just past full moon low in the western sky over the lake. It was beautiful. I knew I would tell the girls about it. That day was the hottest of the season. The pine cones had let loose their pollen and the surface of the lake was yellow-green. The walk I prepared at dawn now in the mid-afternoon was hot and humid. The songs I'd heard on my iPod earbuds in the morning couldn't be heard as well from my laptop, and so writing about how the words of the songs connected with the setting, Danielle Howell's I'm in It, in a swampy area, Miley Cyrus's Good and Broken, as we crossed a rickety bridge. This was harder to do. But still they did it, most of them. As we were coming up the steps by the waterfall, I told them the story of the moon in the morning. It looks so different now, I said to them. The sun is high and hot, the mist has risen from the lake, and the moon is gone. So even when you are in the same place, everything changes. Time moves and changes everything, and it changes you. You are not the same. Earlier on one of our walks, I noticed a wisteria vine about to bloom on one of the pines near the lake. "Oh, look," I said, "wisteria." I thought of Faulkner. I thought of the house where we lived for 14 years, where wisteria bloomed every year on my birthday. I thought of that southern way of making something sweet and purple, luscious and beautiful, even in the worst of places. "Do you know what this is?" I exclaimed, realizing I was being a bit of the nature-loving poet fruitcake that they feared I'd be. "No," they said, and walked away. "It will be in bloom soon," I said quietly. The next day was a breakthrough day. Since I hadn't made them read out loud, they got antsy to do it. "Can I read now?" they'd say in the middle of the lesson I was teaching. On the third day of class, I started by asking who wanted to read. 3 did. Most of them said pass and didn't even make eye contact with me. I was disappointed. I was starting to get tired of the fact that they wanted to do something if I told them it wasn't time to do it, and they didn't want to do something when I told them it was time. Didn't their mothers teach them manners, I thought? Oh. So the lesson went on with more resistance than before, from both them and me. And at the end I said, "This is your last assignment of the day. I want you to write about a woman who is courageous. It could be someone you know or someone you make up. It doesn't matter. Paint a portrait portrait in words of a woman who is unafraid. And when you're done, you will each read it to me one by one out on the porch while the field instructor watches you. As a treat, you can pick the songs, any songs you like, on my iPod while you wait for your turn to read to me. Out they came, one after the other, shy, quiet. Most of them read about their mother, her courage, her toughness, her making ends meet, her needing no man, her cooking, her refusal to allow backtalk, her love, her hands. To the ones who were leaving in April, I said, you could give that to her for Mother's Day. To the ones who would still be there in May, I said, you could send that to her for Mother's Day. When I came back into the building at the end, there were tears in my eyes. You crying? Said the field instructor. Yes, I said. What they wrote was beautiful. And even though the class was over, the girls suddenly decided they wanted to read. They almost all read. It wasn't a lack of love from their mothers or for their mothers, I realized, that got them here. Even when the mothers left them or did drugs with them or let them be hurt by men, the mother was not the problem. Loving the mother was not the problem. In fact, reconnecting with that mother's love, even if it was just in writing, even if they were mostly making it up, might be just what they need to begin to make that change within that I came here to teach them. On the morning of the next class, I went to sit by the lake to write, and I noticed that the wisteria were in bloom. Bees buzzed, a black and yellow butterfly drank. The sky was blue behind the purple vine. A slight wind had blown the pollen from the lake, and the surface was ripply and green-blue. The smell was sweet. We had come through. When it is over. You think you have time left, and then you do not. Like a fever, the sudden flush of ending. Where did the air go? That breeze you felt September mornings. It is hot in here, and dark. You cannot breathe. You long for something to muffle silence, but it is way too late for that. This is something beyond pain, beyond escape. It is the end, the final rest, the conclusion. You feel tricked, all those years, gone, an illusion. You remain only a memory, the embrace of mind from those you left behind. What a waste. You would give anything to taste a kiss again.
Here. Ed will help you here.
This selection started out as an assignment for an English class, and I didn't know when I wrote it that it would end up here, but I was grateful to the professor for letting me express myself in the way that he did. Because it really helped deal with the situation, and it made me realize that in order to deal with something, it has to come out. It has to not stay in. And that's what I learned. I learned to let things go. I learned to let things out, and I was grateful to the professor for letting me get things out and deal with things in a way that I had never dealt with them before. So I was grateful. Still am. The Computer, the Mouse, and the Poet by Amelia Cornell. Writing has always been easy for me. When other things go wrong, writing always goes well. Words flow like a peaceful river from my soul. Writing puts me in a happy place. But like everything in a well-lived life, there is turmoil. I've always been a quiet person, never really letting anyone in out of fear of rejection. I have always had words to share, but worried that people would not understand my words. The act of placing my poetry on display was scary, because it was like putting my heart on a pedestal for intense examination. It was even scarier when people began taking notice of my gift, because they became detectives picking apart a crime scene for clues left behind by the perpetrator. I pictured my family and friends as bloodlusting wolves. The pack of wolves surrounded me like a hill of dirt, dripping spit. I thought they were trying to maul me with praise given strictly to ease my pain, not because I deserved it. I would still feel this way today, but I believe that an angel perched on my shoulder gave me the divine gift of wisdom when he started. Amelia, you cannot accept a compliment. I had so boiling questions like, what brings happiness? Were my virtual questions undeliverable because I had typed the wrong email address to send my questions to God? I wanted answers to questions like, out of billions of people in this world, why was I the one who had to have this disability at birth? Why did I get to experience? Why didn't I get to experience what normal feels like? I was asking these questions selfishly, thinking only of myself, but I am part of a large community of disabled individuals who feel different and not normal. God did receive my email and responded by reminding me of my gift of expressing my questions in poetic rhyme. Poetry is my way of providing a voice for these who cannot be understood. Through my poetry, the despair of disabled individuals can be heard. The hope felt by disabled individuals is hard to understand without personal experience. Upon that realization, I was now free to write without fear or distrust of my readers. I was finally above the influence of my fears and tears. It was as if a bunch of second chance angels surrounded me with their wings. You may be asking, why poetry and not another form of writing? To which I respond, poetry is a short creative outlet that allows me to take a break from my very stressful life for a few minutes. Poetry is my Mary Poppins umbrella. As her umbrella carries her away from her dysfunctional family, poetry carries me away from my problems. When the chores of daily living make me feel less than perfect, or that I cannot keep up in the classroom, poetry is my older sister or brother who is always there to support my true inner thoughts. Poetry provides the voice of experience and for experience. If I can inspire one person to understand that they are not alone in this stressful state of perfection called life, my pain will have been worth it. I want to write a collection of poetry and extend my hand to the masses. All I need is this computer, the mouse, and the poet. Oh, and the wings.
So March of 2011, I was in South Dakota at a reading, and I got a phone call from my brother who said, if you want to see your father before he dies, you should come. And what you need to know is that I've had a very difficult relationship with my family, and my father, after I came out, my father literally did not talk to me for about a decade. So it was a very complicated thing to go back. But I went to the hospital in Arkansas, and the very day I got there, the doctors, who had been trying for 2 years to figure out what was wrong with him, diagnosed him with terminal pancreatic cancer. And the doctor said, men in his situation, he had seen last maybe 2 weeks. And the other thing to know is that my mother in 2008 had been in an automobile accident, and so she's in chronic pain and has some mobility issues. So for my father to go home, to die at home, there was no way she could manage it. So I agreed to do it. So I moved home with my parents in the spring of 2011, thinking I was there for 2, maybe 3 weeks, and I was going to help my mother. But my father is a stubborn old Southern man, and he lasted for 13 weeks. And I love that phrase you used, the second chance angels, because I sort of feel like that's what that was. I don't think we never had any kind of, made for television movie reconciliation and all that. And in fact, he only brought up the issue once in the hospital, and then that was it. And the rest of it, I think there was just kind of the quiet acclamation of being there and taking care of him and giving his medicine and picking him up and putting him in his wheelchair and taking him outside to smoke because the hospice nurse said, what difference is that going to make now? But what I did too while I was there, I couldn't work on my academic work. So every morning I would get up, and I got up like I always do, 6 o'clock or so. But my parents were sleeping later and later, and my father didn't have to take his first medicine until 9 a.m., so that's when I knew I was going to go in and wake them up. So I had 2-3 hours every morning to do stuff. I fed the cat, I did things like that, but I wrote, and I wrote a lot of it is stuff that was just me processing things. But when it was over, I started going back through a lot of the things I had been writing and putting them together. And so I sent a piece in for this called 13 Weeks, and it's for my father, 18th of June 2011, and it's in 3 parts. So 13 weeks. 1, instructions. Make sure he swallows them all. Ask if he needs another sip of water. Ask if he's okay before he drifts back to sleep. He will sleep a lot. Brush his hair over as he sleeps. His face is thin now, that spot over his eye darker, the one he got from Grandpa Roy. His hands seem large and dark against his thin frame, clasped over his chest in the dim room. When he wakes, ask if he's okay. If he says something that makes no sense, just say, okay. Did you miss the bus? No, I'm staying with you today. Do we need to put a battery on that tractor? No, but you need to finish taking your medicine. How long are you going to be here? Till you're okay. 2, knowledge. The nurse called it a roller coaster, this lift and dip of days, the way my father may drift to sleep, twitch and shake, eyes glazed, then wake, spend the day or night alert. Sometimes we think it must be the end, but then he's back, hungry, demanding something sweet or to be wheeled out for a smoke, his eyes bright, that grin. She says he's done this so much that when it really does get bad, we won't know to know it, or won't accept that this is it, expecting, waiting for him to wake, my mother ready to cook him anything, and me ready to lift him to his chair, wheel him anywhere. 3, anchor. In the dark, the hospice oxygen tank bubbles like an aquarium, and in the blue light of their room, my father lies on a narrow reef of bed. For so long, I thought he was a shark, driven thing, all sharp teeth and short vision. But now I know better. His eyes closed, dentures too big. He's a diver, hooked to that tank, about ready to surface. But not yet. My mother in her chair, leaning on his bed, asleep. This last thing, this anchor.
I don't know about you, but I'm deeply in awe of the willingness of our contributors to be so bold with language and their willingness to recall and invent these new metaphors